Man, this is disturbing. British government reportedly believes radicalisation into the far right could occur from reading Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Aldous Huxley, and George Orwell. A new report from author Douglas Murray details that the British government reportedly believes radicalisation into the far right can occur from reading a number of authors. This is an independent report on the gov.uk website from February 2023. I read through it this morning. I read the entire thing. There's a foreword by the Home Secretary for the UK. There's a number of disturbing quotes in there. So one of the documents viewed had a list of books. According to Murray, this list included Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, John Locke's Two Treatises of Government, and Edmund Burke's Reflection on the Revolution in France. He also noted it contained select works by Thomas Carlyle and Adam Smith. Murray goes on to claim, elsewhere in the RICU, warns that radicalisation could occur from books by authors including C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Aldous Huxley, and Joseph Conrad. Now, in fact, Murray details that George Orwell's 1984 is also on the list of books that produces red flags for the RICU. He also notes that books weren't the only things that RICU saw as red flags. The agency also reported flagged British TV shows Civilization, a great TV show with Peter Capaldi, the thick of it. Was that the Capaldi one? Was that the government one, or have I got that mixed up with something else? Hit me in the comments below. And I thought this was a parody at first, but a problematic TV show, The Great British Railway Journeys. If anyone's seen The Great British Railway Journeys and you can explain to me why that is potentially problematic, I'd love to know. George Orwell made these things clear. There's a link in the description below. George Orwell's 1944 letter revealing why he wrote 1984. This is taken from The Guardian. Death of truth. When propaganda and alternative facts first gripped the world. This is another very interesting article. I'm going to read you a passage from it right now. History stopped in 1936. After that, there was only propaganda. So said George Orwell. And that's a quote from the letter that I just showed you. Let me read that again, because this really needs to ring home. History stopped in 1936. After that, there was only propaganda. This is what George Orwell said in an era when the multiple miseries of the Great Depression were compounded by the ruthless media strategies of Hitler and Stalin. Ruthless media strategies. This was 1936. Do you think 90 years later, with the great technology we have at our disposal, all of the advances in psychology and neurosciences, do you think these ruthless media strategies have not become more ruthless? It's obvious, right? They must have done. Or did we use all of these new sciences and new understandings and new technologies to go, wow, that was pretty ruthless in the past. Let's just wind it all back. Let's just forget about all that and go home. Of course that never happened. Of course the game got more fierce. We live in an information war, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think extreme propaganda and extreme psychological manipulation is not currently taking place through the media, through the social media? Truth was the first casualty of the Great Depression, reflecting the anguish of the time. Propaganda was manufactured on an unprecedented scale as economic disaster threatened to trigger shooting wars. So, as George Orwell said, useful lies were preferred to harmful truths. He went further, declaring that history stopped in 1936, and after that there was only propaganda. Take a minute. Read this again with me. These things have to stick. Truth was the first casualty of the Great Depression. Truth. This reflected the anguish of the time. Propaganda was manufactured on an unprecedented scale. This is the 1930s, ladies and gentlemen. As economic disaster threatened. Is that happening today? Are we looking at economic disaster? As economic disaster threatened to trigger shooting wars. Hello, America. As George Orwell said, useful lies were preferred to harmful truths. Look at everything that's happened over the past few years. Look at what is coming out at this time. Use the comparison. George Orwell went further, declaring that history stopped in 1936, and after that there was only propaganda. We're about 90 years later now. How much do you think propaganda has evolved? How much study do you think has taken place where propaganda, the understanding of the brain through neuroscience and psychology, how much do you think that has merged? The Edward Bernays book, The Art of Propaganda, I think it was written about this time in the late 1930s, has never been more relevant. I read it recently. Suggest you go and find a copy before it magically disappears. It explains everything. It makes it perfectly clear. We have to take action. We have to protect ourselves. We have to protect our literature. We have to understand propaganda. If you understand propaganda, then you cannot be a victim of it. They don't teach you this in the schools. They don't teach you that you're constantly under attack from messaging. Messages to buy stuff that you don't even want. Messages to influence you. Change the way that you think. And we've seen that through recent elections in the US, in the UK, across Europe, across Asia, across South America. There's big issues. And the fact that I'm restricted in my language when I'm trying to discuss those issues with you should be a great cause for concern.